Once upon a time, there lived a king and a queen who were deeply unhappy because they had no children. They were more sorrowful than words can express. They traveled to every corner of the world, visited healing waters, made vows, and went on pilgrimages, but for a long time, nothing worked. At last, however, their wish was granted. The queen gave birth to a daughter. There was a magnificent christening, and to ensure the little princess would have every perfection imaginable, the king and queen chose all the fairies they could find in the kingdom to be her godmothers. They found 7 fairies in total. The plan was for each of them to give the princess a magical gift, as was the custom of fairies in those days. After the christening ceremony, the whole company returned to the king's palace, where a grand feast had been prepared for the fairies. In front of each fairy was placed a magnificent setting, a heavy case of solid gold containing a spoon, a knife, and a fork, all made of pure gold and set with sparkling diamonds and rubies. But just as they were taking their seats at the table, a very old fairy entered the hall. No one had invited her, because she had not left her tower for more than 50 years, and everyone believed she was either dead or enchanted. The king quickly ordered a place to be set for her, but he could not give her a solid gold case like the others, because only 7 had been made for the 7 invited fairies. The old fairy felt she was being slighted and muttered angry threats between her teeth. One of the young fairies, who was sitting nearby, overheard her grumbling. Fearing the old woman might give the little princess an unlucky gift, the young fairy left the table as soon as dinner was over and hid herself behind the heavy velvet curtains. She wanted to be the last to speak so that she might undo, as much as possible, any evil the old fairy intended. Meanwhile, the fairies began to give their gifts to the princess. The youngest gave her the gift of being the most beautiful person in the world. The next gave her the wit and intelligence of an angel. The third gave her wonderful grace in everything she did. The fourth said she would dance perfectly well. The fifth said she would sing like a nightingale. The sixth said she would play every kind of musical instrument to the utmost perfection. Then it was the old fairy's turn. Shaking her head more with spite than with age, she said that the princess should have her hand pierced by a spindle and die of the wound. This terrible gift made the whole company tremble, and everyone began to cry. At that very instant, the young fairy stepped out from behind the curtains and spoke these words aloud. "Be reassured, O king and queen, your daughter shall not die of this disaster. It is true, I do not have the power to completely undo what my elder has done. The princess will indeed pierce her hand with a spindle, but instead of dying, she shall only fall into a profound sleep, which shall last for exactly 100 years. At the end of that time, a king's son shall come and awake her." The king, trying to avoid the misfortune foretold by the old fairy, immediately issued a proclamation. He forbade everyone, on pain of death, to spin with a distaff and spindle, or even to have a spindle in their house. About 15 or 16 years later, the king and queen went to stay at one of their pleasure houses in the countryside. The young princess happened to be exploring the castle that day, running from room to room. She eventually climbed to a little room at the very top of a tower. There, she found a good old woman all alone, spinning with her spindle. This simple woman had never heard of the king's law against spindles. "What are you doing there, my good woman?" asked the princess. "I am spinning, my pretty child," said the old woman, who did not know who she was. "Oh, how pretty that looks," said the princess. "How do you do it? Give it to me so I can see if I can do it too." She had no sooner taken the spindle into her hand than, perhaps because she was a bit hasty or a bit clumsy, or simply because the fairy's decree had ordained it, the sharp point ran into her hand, and she fell down in a deep swoon. The good old woman, not knowing what to do, cried out for help. People came running from every quarter. They threw water on the princess's face, unlaced her dress to help her breathe, struck her gently on the palms of her hands, and rubbed her temples with scented water, but nothing would bring her back to herself. The king, hearing the noise, came up to the tower. He remembered the prediction of the fairies and realized that this had to happen. He ordered the princess to be carried into the finest apartment in the palace and laid upon a bed embroidered with gold and silver. Even in her sleep, she looked like an angel. She was so very beautiful. Her swooning had not taken away the lovely color of her complexion. Her cheeks were like carnations and her lips like coral. Her eyes were shut, but they could hear her breathing softly, which satisfied everyone that she was not dead. The king commanded that no one should disturb her, but let her sleep quietly until the hour of her awakening had come. The good fairy, who had saved her life by changing the curse to sleep, was in the kingdom of Matakin, 12,000 leagues away, when this accident happened. But she was instantly informed of it by a little dwarf who had boots of 7 leagues, magical boots that allowed him to cover 7 leagues in a single stride. The fairy left immediately, and she arrived at the palace about an hour later in a fiery chariot drawn by dragons. The king helped her out of the chariot. She approved of everything he had done, but being a fairy of great foresight, she thought, when the princess wakes up in 100 years, she will be all alone in this old palace and she won't know what to do. So this is what she did. She touched with her wand everything in the palace, except the king and the queen. She touched the governesses, maids of honor, ladies of the bedchamber, gentlemen, officers, stewards, cooks, undercooks, kitchen boys, guards, the Swiss guards with their colorful uniforms, pages, and footmen. She likewise touched all the horses in the stables as well as their grooms, the great dogs in the courtyard, and even pretty little Mopsy, the princess's little spaniel dog, which lay by her on the bed. Immediately upon her touching them, they all fell asleep. They would not wake up until their mistress did, so they could be ready to wait upon her the moment she needed them. Even the spits at the fire, loaded with partridges and pheasants, fell asleep, and the fire itself fell asleep. All this was done in a moment. Fairies are never long in doing their business. Then the king and queen, having kissed their dear child without waking her, left the palace. They put forth a proclamation that nobody should dare to come near it. But this warning wasn't even necessary. In just a quarter of an hour, a vast number of trees, great and small, bushes and brambles grew up all around the park. They twisted together so thickly that neither man nor beast could pass through. Nothing could be seen but the very tops of the palace towers, and even that only from a good distance away. Everyone knew the fairy had done this so that the princess would have nothing to fear from curious people while she slept. When 100 years were gone and past, the son of the king then reigning, who was of a different family from the sleeping princess, was hunting in that part of the country. He asked his glowing retinue, "What are those towers I see rising out of the middle of that great thick wood?" Everyone answered according to what they had heard. Some said it was an old haunted castle full of spirits. Others said it was a meeting place for witches. The most common opinion was that an ogre lived there, and that he carried all the children he could catch to that lair, so he could eat them at his leisure, since only he could pass through the wood. The prince did not know what to believe. Just then, a very aged countryman spoke to him. "May it please your royal highness, it is now more than 50 years since I heard my father, who had heard it from my grandfather, say that there was a princess in this castle, the most beautiful ever seen. He said she must sleep there for 100 years and would be awakened by a king's son for whom she was reserved." The young prince was set on fire by these words. He believed without a moment's doubt that he was the one destined to finish this rare adventure. Pushed on by love and honor, he resolved to look into it that very moment. Scarce had he advanced toward the wood when all the great trees, the bushes, and the brambles gave way of themselves to let him pass. He walked toward the castle, which he saw at the end of a long avenue. What surprised him was that none of his people could follow him, because the trees closed up again as soon as he had passed through them. However, a young and brave prince is always valiant. He continued on his way. He came into a spacious outer courtyard where everything he saw might have frozen the most fearless person with horror. There reigned a frightful silence. The image of death was everywhere, with bodies of men and animals stretched out on the ground, seeming to be dead. But he soon realized by the rosy faces and pimpled noses of the guards that they were only asleep. Their goblets, which still held some drops of wine, showed plainly that they had fallen asleep while drinking. He crossed a courtyard paved with marble, went up the stairs, and entered the guard chamber, where the guards were standing in their ranks with their muskets on their shoulders, snoring as loud as they could. After that, he went through several rooms full of gentlemen and ladies, all asleep, some standing, others sitting. At last he came into a chamber all gilded with gold. There he saw, upon a bed with the curtains open, the finest sight he had ever beheld, a princess, who appeared to be about 15 or 16 years of age, whose bright and resplendent beauty seemed almost divine. He approached with trembling and admiration, and fell down on his knees before her. And now, as the enchantment was at an end, the princess awoke. She looked at him with eyes more tender than a first meeting would usually allow. "Is it you, my prince?" she said to him. "You have waited a long time." The prince, charmed by these words and even more by the manner in which they were spoken, did not know how to show his joy and gratitude. He assured her that he loved her better than he did himself. His words were disjointed, and he stammered a bit, but that pleased her all the more. Little eloquence means a great deal of love. He was more embarrassed than she was, and we need not wonder at it. She had had time to think about what to say to him, for it is very probable that the good fairy had given her pleasant dreams during her long sleep. In short, they talked for 4 hours, and they hadn't said half of what they had to say. In the meantime, the entire palace had awakened. Everyone thought about their own business, and since they were not in love, they were ready to die of hunger. The chief lady of honor, being just as hungry as the others, grew very impatient and told the princess aloud that supper was served. The prince helped the princess to rise. She was entirely dressed, and very magnificently, though His Royal Highness was careful not to tell her that she was dressed like his great-grandmother, with a high stiff collar. She looked not a bit less beautiful and charming for all that. They went into the great hall of mirrors where they supped and were served by the princess's officers. The violins and oboes played old tunes, but they were excellent, even though it had been over 100 years since they were last played. After supper, without losing any time, the Lord Almoner married them in the castle chapel, and the chief lady of honor drew the curtains for them. The castle was filled with joy and light, and the prince and princess lived happily ever after.